Thank you. I want to talk about this notion that one of the key to Rome was this whole notion of civic virtue. And if you look at the United States today and you see a congresswoman in Minnesota who's advising her constituents to vote not to pay federal taxes if the proceeds go to fund the healthcare reform. You look at states, attorney generals in various states suing the federal government for overreaching. I wonder if this notion of civic virtue, had Madison had his debates today, if he would have come out of the same place.
Would you mind repeating just the last part of it?
Sure. My question is, this whole notion of civic virtue, which Madison felt was required for the success of a Republican form of government, how would he view these actions today?
I believe he would view them more as civil disobedience. And if this woman is trying to get her constituents to vote in a certain way, she is probably looking out for their best interest. But she may not necessarily be doing what is best for them. She thinks she is, but that's not always true. So it's trying to get people to not pay taxes is a form of civil disobedience, and she's trying to do it in the most legal way possible.
I would have to disagree. I would think Madison would be in support of this because in Federalist 10, he was in support of people's views and their factions. He would want these people, even if they're right or wrong, to express their opinion so that we can influence and expand the sphere of the people.
In Federalist 10, Madison actually described factions as putting their own natural rights above those of the common good.
Thank you.
I want to follow up a little more on an assumption that is made in your opening presentation regarding Federalist 51. And they claim that it is the people under the explanation of 51 that are a check on the government. I've always read 51 as rejecting that, saying that's one, but it's not the most reliable nor the most powerful. Rather, it's the institutional scheme that we have created, that system of checks and balances, ambition counteracting ambition. Michael Kamen, a scholar, says it's the machine that will go of itself. We don't really need the people. Compare that theory of separation of powers, checks and balances, with the Roman theory of separation of powers, checks and balances. Are they alike? Did our drafters change something? What's your thinking?
Many of the processes of the Roman government are actually very similar, or you can draw a parallel between them and our own government. For example, there was the tribunals, which is part of the executives in Rome, and they would suggest legislation to the Assembly of Tribes, and then they would approve it, and then it'd go back to the tribunals for approval, which is very similar to how the president would suggest legislation to the Congress, and then he would later sign it or veto the legislation.
So stay with that for just a second. As I understand legislative power in Rome, it's divided between two independent bodies.
Yes.
How is that different from one legislative body divided into two houses?
In Rome, the tribunes that she was talking about, those were members of the executive. Their executive branch was broken into different parts. It was basically like all the powers of the president, but divided up. And then the legislative was 3 different assemblies. So together the Senate, which was almost a distinct branch in itself, and then these assemblies together were like the legislative. And they have to get their laws back to the executive, specifically the tribunes, in order to get them passed and made into law.
However, as was seen in the Roman government, the tribunes had an absolute veto, so they could control anything that the Senate and the legislative said, almost making it seem as though there was no check and balance, or not check and balance, but equality. It was the councils were way up here and the legislative was down here.
Also, the veto power is also seen in Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2 in our Constitution, as well as in Federalist 70, where they stress the importance of the veto power, in which it says that it acts as a guard against any impulse against the public good.
We've talked a great deal about popular sovereignty and the will of the people and those sort of things. And I think you talked about the idea of representing different social classes. Yet these guys were aristocrats in almost every sense of the word. Were they being hypocritical in calling upon the voice of the people and the will of the people while they were among the wealthiest, best educated elites in American society?
They were being slightly hypocritical. However, because they were more educated, they knew how to work with the government, and they knew they were better at critical thinking and solving these problems because they had the time to do so. and they knew that no one else was going to be able to set up this government. People that had to work for a living wouldn't have the time to. They needed to earn their money. So they took it upon themselves. It was a form of civic virtue to create this government that would work for the people, and that was what they were doing.
This idea can be seen in Federal Farmer 1, where it says that deliberate and thinking men create governments based on free principles. So they are the people that create the government that are best for the people.
Yet were they handing this government that they had so carefully and thoughtfully created over to the blithering idiots that they saw as the rest of society?
While it may be seen that they are doing that, I still think it is important, as seen in concepts found in Federalist 39 and Federalist 84, where the prohibition of the titles of nobility is the cornerstone of Republican government. And that, as we can see in several instances, as we mentioned before, 51 and 49, where people are the only legitimate fountain of authority or power.
I'd like to disagree with the fact that they just kind of handed it off to the people, and I'd like to cite federalism kind of as a way to combat just handing something off, because there's the various levels of government, and the people can be involved in them, and through the different levels they can hear about what's happening on the higher up levels. So no, I don't think they handed it over.
Thank you.